On this episode of the Dairyland Initiative podcast, we're going to be going into extreme makeover mode. Hi, I'm Courtney Hallbach.
And I'm Nigel Cook,
And this is the Dairyland Initiative podcast,
where we get to discuss issues related to the housing and management of dairy cattle.
Let's dive in. Well, on our last episode, we talked about productive life. And you thought it would be fitting to follow up with extreme makeover because we want to do what's best for cow comfort and taking preventative measures.
We want to give those herds a little bit of a makeover.
Yeah.
So, Courtney, 20 years ago, there was a show on TV called Extreme Makeover.
Yeah, I was watching that during high school, I think.
Oh, God. With Ty Pennington.
Yeah, I thought it was Ryan Seacrest, but I looked it up on Google, and it is Ty Pennington.
It was Ty Pennington, and he's had a bit of resurgence lately. So I stole the title because we're at the time in the mid-early 2000s, we're starting to change some Freestall barns.
Okay.
And so this is Extreme Makeover Freestall Edition. And pictured behind us is a big pile of concrete. That was the old concrete briskets and horrible loops. So that was one of the farms that we did. So we're going to take another trip down memory lane, just one more time.
Just one more time.
Because back then, what we started to notice when we were comparing the Wisconsin freestall industry, typically larger herds above 500 cows, with our tiestall industry, smaller herds under 100 cows, was that milk production was different. Mm-hmm. And while average milk per cow tended to be higher in these TMR-fed freestall herds, the performance of older cows was not as good as we expected.
Okay.
So we're looking here at a mature equivalent 305 milk, and it's a way of manipulating milk production to compare across lactations. Mm-hmm. So mature equivalent, it raises everybody up to a third lactation cow.
Okay.
And so the numbers, as you compare them across lactations, instead of going up as the cow gets older, they're supposed to be the same.
Okay.
If the equation was perfect, it would take all of the variation out. And you can kind of see in our smaller herds, there is a little bit of a loss as you go from lactation 1 to 2 to 3, of the tune of about 1,000 pounds or 500 kilos. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our slides that we're using here, we're going to talk about pounds a lot in this.
Okay.
So just divide it by 2-ish for kilos.
Okay.
So that was our smaller herds, about 1,000 pounds difference between the third lactation and the first. But when we got to the freestall herds, the larger herds, that had grown to 2,300 pounds.
Yikes.
So the older cows were much less in terms of their performance relative to the heifers. And we started to ask why that was. Because it wasn't the equation. The equation was,
pretty solid.
Yeah, it was working as well as it would for smaller herds. Mm-hmm. So why have we more than doubled the, lost potential milk in older cows?
Yeah.
And we realized that one of the things that was potentially doing that was lameness. And lameness was related to poor cow comfort, and that's why we got into the extreme makeover business.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's why we're here today.
So we're going to look at some of our adventures as we went to farms and did these makeovers. And the priorities are threefold. The first one, give them cushion traction, and so it was really about the surface that the cows were on.
Yeah.
And in many situations, we converted farms from mattresses to sand. So that was kind of the one main way of doing things. The second priority is to get rid of the obstructions. And we talked about that in lunge and bob and
couple episodes
the brisket locator, allowing the cow to perform her normal movements. Mm-hmm. Get rid of obstructions. And then finally, give them space. Give them the resting space they need. So simple, 3 things. Do those 3 things.
A recipe for success.
You improve cow comfort.
And
that was our mission.
Longer living cows to get back to the
maybe
productive
not.
life? Okay.
Hopefully more higher producing cows.
Okay.
for the time that they live in the herd. Yeah.
Excellent.
And if we compare very simply our DHI data comparing sand herds with mattress herds, these would be all predominantly freestall based, we were seeing differences in overall milk production to the tune of about 7 pounds of energy corrected milk, 3.1 kilos per cow per day, or 2,500 pounds.
In favor of our sand herds.
In favor of sand. And we looked at that and said, you could do a lot with manure handling and replacing pumps
to see that kind of benefit.
So slightly lower cell count, slightly lower turnover rate, improved fresh cow health as well along the way. But a lot of milk difference between these herds. And these are averages. There are really good mattress herds. There are some bad sand herds. This is, again, on average.
Yep.
So we've talked about this in our freestall episodes of getting rid of obstructions and cows,
taking on remodeling themselves.
Left alone, they'll remodel on their own.
They
but
need to.
Perhaps we should give them a helping hand. And this was one of the first remodels, this little doghouse that we built out here.
What we're showing is on short sidewall stall platforms. If cows need that lunge and bob space, they might just take out the chicken wire, but why not help them with a little
just a little build
insert.
Out.
Yep, little build out.
And that became the sort of full new curtain build out, and then that became just redo the wall and let's just do the whole thing as we got more confident in how much effect this type of thing had. So we've kind of seen that, and then on the head-to-head platforms, getting rid of those bars in their faces and high brisket locators and those kinds of things, giving them the freedom to use that lunge space.
Yeah.
So that's important. And then we had, working with the industry, the advent of these single beam mounting systems. This was one of the very first installations. A single box beam. You hang the standpipe off that. You suspend the loop from that box beam, and you can then remodel barns with any width of stall that you like.
Isn't that great?
It was amazing, because we would go to farms and we can't change the width of the stalls because everything's concreted in.
Mm-hmm.
And we go, you don't necessarily have to do that. And so we would go to farms with these wooden supports that were concreted, set in stone, and say, hey, we can jackhammer that thing out. And you could potentially reuse a lot of the materials. And we did some homemade single and double beam mounting systems
to begin with, but
little C clamps, just on handmade standpipes like this. But again, the industry came along and provided us the equipment we needed.
Pretty simple. What about surface, though? That's
the big one.
A little bit tricky.
That's a pretty substantial change to make.
And it really depends on your manure handling system as well, and where you can source sand from.
Cheapest part of this is changing the stalls. The expensive bit is changing the manure handling system. Because you can't go to a farm and say, hey, you should put sand in when they have a gravity flow earthen lagoon.
Yep, not going to happen.
Don't do that. Please don't do that. So we're focused here on what we do in the barn and how we convert mattress barns over. And this was one of the first ones. This was a barn with not the worst stalls. There's some issues there.
See some obstructions.
47 inches wide, slightly narrow loop. You can kind of see what happened there. But this farm just went through, took everything out. Removed the whole concrete platform, repoured the curbs at the back, and then put in sand and a sand lane system in. So this was a kind of full reno on the base.
Yeah.
They didn't change anything above that. So the loops stayed the same. So all of this stuff we didn't touch. We kind of left it all alone. And we tracked that herd over time, and just to explore, we'd seen those sort of average industry data, but now we've got a herd with the same management changing from mattress to sand.
Yeah, and is there a benefit for them?
Yeah, and over a 2-3 year period, we saw 6 pounds of milk, virtually identical to what we'd seen earlier. 1,800 pounds, 900,000 kilos of milk across a lactation, slightly lower cell counts and improved fertility. Turnover rate was changed quite a lot here, because once these farms cracked cow comfort, they got into expansion mode.
Ah.
Because when a US dairy doesn't have to cull a cow,
let's add more cows.
Exactly. You've got a replacement waiting for a home.
Yeah.
So how about keeping the replacement and keeping the cow? And that's when you build the next barn. And those farms got bigger. So that explains why the turnover rates actually went down that much. We did go to some farms and cut curbs.
Okay.
The saws that you see in housing developments where they cut at the end of the driveway.
Yes.
You can use those in barns to cut the curb. You just have to miss the rebar. So they put rebar in these things, and you don't want to put your saw through the rebar.
And you're cutting height or width, or what are you cutting?
You're just taking a level surface and cutting a platform, a curb in place by putting the blade in.
Yeah. Okay.
You go through quite a few blades. Some people add it on, and you have to be a little bit careful about the loop and the distance from the back curb in this kind of scenario. But you can concrete a retainer onto the back of the curb, as you see here. So we've done a lot of those things, but the cheaper options were to add a bedding retainer, to remove the mattress but leave the concrete platform.
Yeah.
Add some kind of a retainer on the back of that platform, and then put sand over the top.
Are you concerned, though, with curb height at all, or are cows getting in and out of stalls?
Yes, curb height and bedding depth,
Yeah.
because you're only putting a relatively small amount of bedding over concrete. And at some point, certainly heifers, some cows, they definitely don't like backing off very high curbs.
Yeah.
Cows will tolerate more so than heifers. And practically, if you raise that curb to a point where the cows are stepping up and dragging their teats across the retainer, that's not good. So we had a max of about 14 inches, 35 centimeters, and that would hold true for older cows for sure.
Okay.
Younger, less would be better. Which basically meant that you were restrained in terms of how high you could make that retainer. Because a lot of these concrete platforms were built, some were at 7 inches, a lot of them were at 7, some were at 11 inches. And so it really limits you. If your overall is 14, it can be tricky. So one of the common things we used were these fiberglass pipes.
Oh.
And they were being used in the fracking industry. They would kind of sleeve together, and they would use them for fracking. They'd inject sand through them. But they discarded quite a lot of them, and they became readily available. So, dairy farmers snapped them up, and we used them in a lot of our earlier remodels.
By putting these bedding retainers on, are you afraid of any milk or urine getting stuck in the back of the bed?
Initially, yeah. Yeah, we were kind of going, where does the moisture go? So we'd leave a little spacer and allow some drainage underneath that. Later, it just kind of gets soaked up with the bedding. So we worried less about it. So this is the very first farm, the very first mattress to sand conversion in the state. Didn't change the loops, didn't change, and there's some compromises in terms of size that you see here. But this was the fiberglass pipe, bolted to the back edge, and you can see the little spacer that we had underneath there. And, massive cow reaction. They love them.
Yeah, so why did this farm originally say, let's go to sand? Were they seeing herd issues, lameness?
Yeah. Disappointing production, lameness, just good farms wanting to get to the next level, recognizing that something was holding them back, and it wasn't necessarily food related, nutrition related. And we were helped by a lot of industry consultants at the time that were seeing the research, looking at the ideas and saying, let's try this. This is the rolling herd average kind of shooting up on this farm, because it was like cow comfort was the brake. And when you release the brake, fix the cow comfort, the production just shot
Excellent.
up. And these lines that I'm showing here are the mature equivalent 305 milk lines. And the black line is heifers and the red line is older cows. And before the change, there's a big gap. This is what we call the ME gap that we were seeing in a lot of those freestall barns, where the older cows were underperforming relative to the first lactation heifers. And after the change, what you notice is the lines flip.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the older cows are now doing better relative to the first lactation heifers.
I like to see that.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we kind of see that, and we track this farm as well. Guess what? 6 pounds of milk, 3 kilos from transitioning from mattress to sand, 2,500 pounds of rolling herd average. But where did the milk come from? More so from the older cows than the younger ones.
Okay.
So
this is a
bigger
benefit
improvement
for the older mature cows.
Exactly. Those older cows are no longer mastitic and lame and can stay in the herd longer if they're healthier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, these are the things that we saw. Cell count dropped, fertility improved, and so on. And when we did like partial budgets after the fact,
What, you didn't do them beforehand? You tell
not in the early days. We just kind of said
the change.
Let's go for it. When you put in the real numbers, that this is what they experienced, this is how much it cost. The payback on this farm was 1.5 years.
Nothing.
Yeah.
It's just short timeline.
It's nothing. And that enabled the next barn to be built because you've got
more.
all these heifers.
Yeah.
Farmers want to keep their heifers. And then we tried different materials for those bedding retainers. So fiberglass pipes were one. This is treated landscape timber, treated with some nasty chemicals.
I was going to say that doesn't sound good for the environment.
Prevents it rotting. I think it's got some arsenic and various other things in it. Don't lick it too much,
Okay.
would be my advice. Same rules, maximum 14 inches, 35 centimeters overall height. And we'd use these 8.5-inch concrete lag bolts to hold this in place.
Okay.
And this timber comes in some different shapes and sizes. 4x4 inch, 6x4, 6x6. So depending on how high that concrete platform is, you can actually get up to 6 inches of bedding over the surface with a 6x4 or 6x6.
Are you concerned about the width at all?
Not so much. I mean, 4 inches, pretty reasonable.
Okay.
If it were wider, you can actually bevel it. So here's an example of a 4x4 lag bolt underneath the divider loop, basically holding it in place. And the beauty with this is you can move cows to one alleyway, rip along, remove the mattresses, put the retainer in, move the cows back into the alleyway that you were working in, do the other side, and you're done in a day.
I was going to ask, how do these farms remodel with cows in the pen?
Yeah, so you can remodel this way because this is fairly quick. If you're pouring concrete, the cows have to live somewhere else.
Okay.
And so oftentimes they built the new barn first and then remodeled the old barn.
Okay.
And the cows were moved to the new barn. Good point, Courtney.
Yeah.
The cows do have to live somewhere.
Yeah, and you got to keep working.
This was our little stanchion, which we converted to a tiestall on the university campus, and a younger looking me putting
That's
a
you?
bedding retainer. Yeah, that's me putting one of those 6x4s in place. So we have first-hand experience of what's entailed here, and this just highlights that the mix between a 4x4 and a 6x4 or 6x6, and you can kind of see we beveled the side on this one
on the wider.
On the wider one, yeah.
Yeah.
So overall, a lot of 11 to 13 inch curbs based on the size of these retainers. This is a farm that we went in and built. One barn, the stalls were so bad we just redid everything.
Okay.
The other barn, like this one, was actually pretty good. The loops were good, so we just did the retainer option as we've converted from mattresses to sand. And this was a really cool one we followed for a number of years because I think the farmer was just he wanted to do so much good in terms of cow comfort, and to see lameness go from 33% to 7%.
Wow.
That was his goal.
Good.
Yeah, it felt really good. And then to see as a result of that, a herd that was kind of stuck. It had a lot of herds in the sort of 26,000 rolling herd average, 85 pounds of milk, managing well, feeding well, but cow comfort was holding them back.
Yeah, can't get to that next level.
And when they fixed it, you see rolling herd average just go straight up, but past 30,000, 100 pounds of milk per cow.
Yeah.
Where was the milk coming from? A lot of it was coming from older, fit cows that weren't lame. So that's what we were kind of learning along the way. Final options, angle irons. Wasn't a huge fan of this, but we saw some people use kind of these L shapes or little shepherd's crooks. You'd have a machine shop kind of build that and then bolt those onto the back of the curb, so you could do that. We we've pretty much used anything
Yeah,
as
I can
a
see that,
bedding
yeah.
retainer. But what about the herds that just simply refuse to put sand in?
Wait, you're going to say that not sand is okay?
I'm not going to say that.
Oh, okay.
But there are herds that, they struggle because of their manure handling system. They want to stay with mattresses, and we learned add softness as much as you can, and the easiest way to do that was to add layers of foam. We had the old rubber crumb pads, take back the cover or replace the cover, add foam over the top, and this was, became the sort of premium pad pasture mat concept that our friends at the Comfort Zone were doing, and it helped.
Yeah.
We saw a cow response from creating this soft texture next to the cow's bony prominences, and so the mattresses got a little plumper and the cows got a little comfier.
Excellent.
Yeah. So this herd was another experience because they stayed with mattresses, and we achieved a remarkable improvement based on the size of the stalls. Because what you don't get is, yes, you can see, if you're looking at a picture, this cow doesn't fit this stall.
No, she's a little big.
When you look at the dimensions of the stall, it's actually not that bad. This is a 47-inch wide stall, which was big in the day.
Oh, I was going to say, not that bad.
Not that bad. It's not
You've
44.
taught me differently, Dr. Cook.
But what you don't get is that's a massive cow. So the cows in this herd were really big, like 1,800 plus pound cows. And so we went about building for the size of the cow. So this was part the way through because they were doing all the work themselves. They've remodeled the head-to-heads. They haven't remodeled the sidewall stalls yet.
All the cows are in the head-to-heads.
The cows are kind of choosing, and that's another part of the philosophy is you don't have to change all the stalls in a day. Give me 15 stalls. Let me do what I want to do to 15 stalls and let
watch
the cows
watch
decide. The cows. Let the cows tell you whether you did the right thing or not. So we actually went to 54-inch wide stalls. So we changed the width by 7 inches to accommodate these bigger cows. Couldn't obviously change the platform, but when you look at them, they at least
fit in the stall?
Fit the space.
Yeah,
they fit the space. And then 2,000 pounds of milk, 5 pounds of milk per cow per day. There's a theme here. Pretty consistent performance. And if you notice on this farm, actually all the milk coming from the older cows.
Yeah.
Those big old mature cows, those big frame cows were just getting beaten up in those little stalls. And then you give them the space that they need and they stay healthy.
Yeah, so what I keep hearing from you, Dr. Cook, is if you give cows a comfortable place to rest and lie down, these older cows are going to be the ones that benefit the most.
They do. Yeah, you've got it, Courtney. So this is a farm we worked with a lot over the years, no longer milking with the previous owners, but this was the sort of archetypal 6-row barn, mattress, 44-inch wide stalls. There are a lot of these barns built in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it just looks bad.
Yeah, look, cows are squeezed in there.
They're squeezed in. So at that point, just said, okay, let's make the stalls bigger. So we went from 44-inch wide stalls, 1.12 meters, to 48-inch wide stalls, 1.22 meters. Adjusted the neck rail a little bit, didn't change the surface or anything, just gave them more space. And obviously when you do that, you lose some stalls.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the farm kept the same number of cows as well.
Overstocking a little bit more. They reduced cows from 84 to 79 cows per pen. So stocking rate 114 to 116. But you do lose capacity.
Yeah.
And farmers are worried about that. But I will tell them, don't worry. They're not using them anyway. Just because you have 74 stalls
doesn't mean
74
stalls are usable stalls.
Exactly. Don't worry anyway. So we gave them their resting space. Comfier cows, more generous, more appropriate dimensions. Not what we're recommending now for this size cow, but getting there because these are the lessons we learned along the way that created those recommendations that you see on the website. And we, on this farm, were able to track those MEs by lactation group, by parity. So we're back here in 2003, And you see this massive drop-off in the MEs from first to second to third lactation. And then it recovers a little bit in fourth because it's really a select population of cows.
Yeah.
Those are the amazing cows that are staying in the herd. But what you look at is the heifer MEs increase over time. Yeah. And that's just good genetics, good breeding. And we didn't change the dimension of the heifer stalls, by the way. Those stayed at 44. Yeah. But what you see over the years is the MEs of the second lactation cows take off at a sharper increase.
And that's because you made a change to stall
to
width.
The older cows. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the improvement in the third lactation, an even steeper rise in ME over time. So again, in this herd, we're seeing that production enhancement coming from
older cows.
Why are they producing more? Because if you track here the number of blocks that those cows were receiving on trim day, we went from about 20-30% of the cows to none.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've got much less lameness.
Yeah.
We're wrapping about the same amount because we didn't design the foot bath right. It took a few more years, yeah.
Okay. Small changes. We only ask for
lameness is decreasing on this farm. And as we track this farm over a more protracted period of time, 1,000 pounds of milk.
Wow.
14 pounds of milk per cow per day. Huge improvements in cell count, in fertility. And this transition from a farm that was frankly struggling to keep cows in the herd, turnover rates, 48%. Mm. So that was, to go back to our last episode, that was that cluster of herds that is having a high turnover rate and losing cows and struggling to maintain herd size, to a herd with normal turnover rates but healthy older cows.
Yeah, what we'd like to see.
And that enabled them to build the next barn, and that was one of our meccas of cow comfort. One that adopted all of our recommendations, and we can again learned along the way a few things that we've improved. So in this herd, we've kind of tracked that performance over time, and it's not just been changes to the barn, it's been changes to heat abatement, to dry cow feeding. So this is kind of a the whole
holistic
management
approach.
team. Yeah, but that's an amazing improvement in production over time. And it only dips here because they bought some heifers to fill the new barn. And then it took a while for those to get with the system. And so what we were able to do is look at, that period, 2003 to 2009 here, and the enhancements to production and performance, and put that in a dollar value. And that came to about $1,300 per cow per year improvement.
Can you imagine what that would be now with inflation?
Could you imagine? So this is important economic impact, positive economic impact on the farm. Mm-hmm. So I used to hear
that goes hand in hand with good welfare.
Yeah, we can't afford to change the barn. We only built it 3 years ago. We can't remodel, and you can. Yeah. You can. So you can construct a partial budget now before you do the remodel.
Oh, good.
Because we kind of know the response we're going to get, so we can predict what that's going to be. We can calculate the cost of the intervention and put in your assumptions for milk price and feed costs. You can look at the potential for improvements in milk and cell count and health and culling. Look at, again, amortize that barn improvement over 3 to 7 years is pretty typical for these kind of interventions, whatever the interest rate of the time is, and estimate your feed costs so, the milk isn't completely free. Yeah, cows making more milk will eat more, so we have to factor in the cost of that increased feed consumption. But we can construct partial budgets and say, okay, intervention's going to cost this. These are the numbers I think we're going to see over this 5-year period. And it's, I think, enabled farmers to make really good economic decisions for their herds and improve cow comfort.
Yeah. And we have this partial budget spreadsheet available on our website.
It is.
So other herds can hopefully do this as well.
So that's the story of Extreme Makeover, Courtney.
That's it?
Back in the day
How long have you been in this business, and this is all you got to
This is all I've got. Just remember that not very long ago, we couldn't do this. We couldn't imagine the improvements that we would get from cow comfort. Barns that had just been built, we used to say, oh, we can't afford to change it. And I'm going to say, you can't afford not to.
We're going to end on that note, because that's a keeper right there, folks. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening.
The Dairyland Initiative is supported by industry leaders who are advancing cow comfort worldwide. We would like to say a special thank you to our premier sponsor, Saputo, who is providing the global community with high-quality dairy products made from high-quality milk from healthy and well-cared-for animals. We'd also like to say thank you to our other sponsors, SaveCows.com, Zinpro, GPS Dairy Consulting, 40 Barn, SureGain Trow Nutrition, Munters, J&D Manufacturing, VES Artex, Ventec, and Kestrel Instruments. Thanks for tuning in to the Dairyland Initiative podcast. Want more Dairyland Initiative? Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on our socials, and visit our website for all of the latest recommendations in dairy cattle housing and management. See you next time.